I was 36 years old the fall I drove up to northern Minnesota for a solo hunting trip. It was 2017, late October. The leaves had turned fully by then, a mix of orange and deep red across the forest, but most had already fallen, and the bare trees looked like black bones sticking up out of the ground. I'd been hunting since I was a teenager, but I usually went with someone, my brother or a friend from work. That year, I needed to be alone. I'd been working long hours, had a rough breakup a few months back, and I just wanted the quiet. No calls, no emails, no noise. I chose a spot about 15 miles from a small town called Ely, right on the edge of Superior National Forest. There was an old trail I had followed before, one that broke off from a disused logging road and curved into a wide patch of dense forest. I remembered it being quiet out there, remote. Not many people bothered with it since it wasn't marked, and it was a pain to drive into unless you had four-wheel drive. I did. I got there mid-morning on a Thursday, parked off the side of the logging road where two ruts cut through the brush and led into the woods. I tossed my pack over my shoulder, strapped my rifle across my back, and walked about 2 miles in. I found a clearing I'd used years before. It had a natural dip in the ground for a fire pit, and some logs nearby I could use as a bench. I set up my small tent, got the firewood ready, and drank some cold water out of my bottle. Then I took the rifle and started scouting. I didn't plan to shoot anything that first afternoon. I just wanted to see the game trails, maybe find some fresh tracks. The woods felt still, not just quiet, but still, like the sound had dropped out of the air. I saw a few prints, some deer, maybe elk, maybe moose. It was hard to tell with the leaves covering the ground, but I followed a narrow path downhill where the brush was broken in spots. I saw scat, looked recent. That lifted my mood. I marked the trees so I could return the next morning. By the time I got back to camp, the light was fading. The air had that sharp edge that meant it would freeze overnight. I made a fire, cooked a can of beans, and sat there with my back to a tree listening. It was the kind of silence that presses into your ears. No wind, no birds, just the pop of the fire. I liked it. Sometime around 10, I crawled into the tent and zipped it shut. I didn't bring a watch, but I had my phone turned off in my pack. I didn't check it. I fell asleep fast. Sometime in the night, I woke up. Not because of a sound exactly, but because of a feeling, like something had changed. I lay there listening, my ears strained in the dark. Then I realized what it was. There were no night sounds at all. No bugs, no owls, nothing. Just total silence, the kind that makes you aware of your own breathing. I waited, maybe a minute, then I heard it crunching, slow and steady. Footsteps, not a deer, not fast enough. It was 2 steps, then a pause, then 2 more. It sounded like boots on leaves. I stayed frozen. My rifle was outside the tent, leaned against a tree. That was the one mistake I didn't normally make, but I had this time. I had a hunting knife inside the tent, but that wouldn't help much if someone had a gun. The footsteps stopped. Then I heard nothing. For a long time, I waited, heart racing, trying not to breathe too loud. My mouth was dry. I lay still for what felt like half an hour, maybe more. Then I heard it again, just 1 step closer. Not right outside, but maybe 30 feet away. Then silence. That time I didn't go back to sleep. I waited until the gray light started to show through the thin nylon of the tent. I crawled out slowly, half expecting to see someone out there, but the woods were empty. My rifle was still against the tree. I looked for tracks but couldn't find any fresh ones. Too many leaves. I told myself it was probably an animal, moose maybe, or some other hunter walking through in the dark, maybe lost. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching. I kept my rifle close the whole morning, went back down the trail I'd scouted, stayed quiet, but my mind wasn't in it. I kept turning around, scanning the woods. Nothing moved. That second night, I almost packed up and left. But I told myself it was in my head. I made a bigger fire, set up some tin cans with pebbles in them on a string around the clearing so I'd hear if anyone walked in. I kept my rifle inside the tent this time, right next to me, but I didn't sleep. Around 1 in the morning, I heard one of the cans rattle. Just once. A short sound. I sat up and grabbed the rifle. My ears were ringing from the silence. I waited, staring at the tent flap. My finger was near the trigger, but no more sounds came. I waited until daylight again before I opened the tent. The string was still up. The cans had just moved a little, but I saw prints, actual boot prints this time, about 10 feet from the edge of the clearing. I followed them for maybe 40 feet before they disappeared into the brush. No drag marks, no sign of an animal, just clear steps, heavy tread, too heavy for hiking boots. They looked like work boots. I decided then to cut the trip short. I packed fast, looking over my shoulder the whole time. My hands were shaking, and I couldn't stop thinking how close those prints were to my tent. I loaded everything back onto my shoulders, took the rifle in one hand, and hiked out. Took almost an hour to get back to the truck. I heard twigs snap a few times behind me, but I didn't stop. I just moved steady and fast. When I finally saw the truck through the trees, I felt this deep kind of relief in my chest. But then I saw it. The driver's side door was wide open. I hadn't left it like that. I stopped cold and just stared. The inside of the truck was a mess. My glove box was open, and papers were scattered all over the front seat. My map was missing. I had stashed a spare key under the back bumper in a magnetic box, and that was gone too. I stood there for maybe a minute, checking the tree lean, rifle up. Then I got in, slammed the door, locked everything, and started it up with the main key I still had. I drove straight back to town, eyes checking the rear view the whole way. When I got to Ely, I told the guy at the gas station what happened. He just gave me a weird look and said a few folks had gone missing in those woods over the years. Mostly hikers, never found. Not many reports, though, since a lot of them were solo trips and no one noticed for weeks. I drove home and didn't go hunting again for almost 2 years. I still don't know who was out there or what they wanted. But it wasn't an animal. It wasn't some accident. Someone was tracking me in those woods, and they knew exactly where I was. I kept thinking about those footsteps, how they stopped just outside the clearing, how the cans rattled once and nothing followed. It was like they were testing how close they could get, like they were trying to see how deep I slept. And when they found the spare key, when they went through my truck, it meant they weren't just some random stranger passing through. They were watching me before I even knew it. And they weren't done. Not yet. But I made sure I was. I've never camped alone since. I still hunt, but only in daylight, and never more than a half mile from my truck. I keep the keys on me. I sleep light, and I never ignore the sound of footsteps again. It was the summer of 2013, and I had taken a few weeks off from work to clear my head. Things had been building up for months, stress, deadlines, people. I needed to step away from it all. I decided to head out to the northwestern part of Montana, near a place called Yaak. I had read about it in an old hunting forum years back. It was remote, quiet, and mostly untouched, which sounded perfect to me. I took my dog, Mason, a 6-year-old Belgian Malinois, who had been with me since he was a pup. Loyal, smart, and strong. Mason had been my hiking and camping partner for years. I drove a beat-up green Ford Ranger, loaded with supplies. A tent, my rifle, food, 2 coolers packed with ice, and a canvas duffel stuffed with clothes and gear. Mason rode in the front seat beside me, ears perked up, tongue out the window, happy as ever. We left early in the morning, the sun barely cresting the horizon, and reached the gravel roads by late afternoon. From there, I kept driving deep into the woods until I couldn't even see tire tracks anymore. I found a small clearing surrounded by tall pine and spruce trees, far enough off any trail that no one would find me by accident. A shallow stream cut across the northern edge of the site, and I saw deer tracks near it. I pitched the tent on higher ground where it wouldn't flood if it rained and laid a wool blanket for Mason outside the flap. He circled it a few times before settling down with a satisfied grunt. The first couple of days went by peacefully. I fished the stream, hiked around, took notes in a little weatherproof notebook I carried. I even spotted a black bear from a distance, just lumbering across a slope and disappearing into the brush. Mason stayed close, alert but calm. We had done this enough times that we knew the rhythm of the woods. Slow, quiet, respectful. On the fourth night, something felt different. It was nothing obvious, just a sense that the air had shifted. The woods were quieter than usual. I didn't hear the usual crickets or owls after the sun went down. That silence hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just peaceful, it was wrong. Mason noticed it too. He didn't rest his head down like normal. Instead, he sat upright, ears forward, muscles tense. I left the fire burning longer that night and kept my rifle beside me in the tent, just in case. The next morning, I saw something odd near the edge of the stream. About 20 yards from where I'd been fishing the day before, the ground looked disturbed. The soil was torn up, and one of the flat stones I'd used as a stepping point had been flipped over. At first, I figured it was a raccoon or maybe even a bear, but the prints didn't match either of those. They were long, narrow, and barefoot. Human. I didn't panic right away. I'd run into other campers or hunters before, though rarely. Maybe someone had come by in the night and kept moving. Still, it didn't sit right with me. I hiked a wider circle around camp that afternoon, checked the tree line, found nothing. No gear, no more prints. Just that one strange area near the stream. That night, I built up the fire higher than usual and didn't sleep much. Mason was restless too. He kept sniffing the wind, his ears constantly swiveling. Around 2 a.m., he let out a low growl. That sound woke me up fast. I sat up and grabbed the rifle. Mason stood just outside the tent flap, head pointed toward the woods on the southern side of camp. I couldn't see anything in the dark, but I waited. I didn't hear footsteps or branches snapping, just silence again, that awful silence. Eventually Mason calmed down, but neither of us really slept. I stayed seated with the rifle across my lap until the sky started turning light. When the sun finally came up, I checked the southern edge of the clearing. That's when I found something else. A single piece of blue cloth snagged on a low branch, maybe from a shirt or jacket. It was dirty and torn like it had been out there a while, but there was no trail beyond that. Just thick brush and uneven ground. I thought about packing up that morning. A smart person probably would have, but a part of me didn't want to be chased off so easily. I told myself I'd stay one more night, keep the fire going, and be gone by sunrise. That day was the longest I remember. Every small sound made me turn. Even birds coming back to the trees didn't bring comfort. I kept the rifle close the entire time. Mason didn't lie down once. He kept pacing the camp's perimeter, quiet but clearly on edge. Just after nightfall, I heard it. Twigs snapping, not close but not far either. Mason was already at attention, facing west. I aimed my flashlight toward the noise but couldn't see anything past the first row of trees. Then I heard it again, slower this time. Not a deer or an animal. These were steps. Deliberate, spaced, human. I shouted out loud, even though I didn't want to. Just instinct, I guess. The sound stopped. No response. Nothing. Just that eerie dead silence again. I threw more wood onto the fire and stood guard near it, heart racing, the rifle heavy in my hands. Time moved like syrup. I kept staring out into the woods, my eyes playing tricks on me. Shadows shifting, branches swaying, but no real movement. Mason didn't bark. He just stared. Then, finally, something broke the spell. A rock came sailing out from the trees. It wasn't huge, but big enough to notice. It landed a few feet from the fire, kicked up dirt, and rolled. Mason exploded, bolting toward the tree lean, barking deep and angry like I'd never heard him do before. I called him back and he stopped just short of the trees, growling, hackles raised. I didn't chase whoever it was. I didn't want to. I just stood by the fire until the sun came up, not blinking, not sitting, not letting my guard down. When it was finally light, I broke camp, packed everything fast and tight. I didn't eat. I didn't stop. I just loaded the truck, called Mason, and got the hell out of there. The drive out took nearly 3 hours, and I didn't relax until I hit pavement again. Looking back, I don't know if someone was watching me that whole time or just stumbled on my camp and got curious, but it didn't feel random. It felt planned. The footprints, the torn cloth, the rock, no words, no face. Just the sense that someone was there and wanted me to know it. I've camped since then, but never that far out again. And never alone. Mason's older now, slower, but still sticks close. Every time I set up camp now, I build 2 fires, one to cook with and one that I keep burning all night. I don't care if it wastes wood. I'd rather burn through logs than sit in that silence again, knowing someone might be watching from the dark, just far enough out that I'll never see them. It was in the summer of 2016 when I decided to take a solo camping trip in the hills near eastern Utah. I had just turned 32 and needed a break from work, people, and everything tied to daily life. I'd grown up in Nevada but moved to Salt Lake City 5 years earlier for a construction job. The hills to the southeast had always pulled at me. Quiet, isolated, dry. Not too far from the border, but far enough from crowds. I packed up a simple gear setup: tent, water jugs, a cooler with dry food, folding chair, hatchet, knife, a decent flashlight, and my .22 rifle. I wasn't expecting trouble, but I didn't like being completely unarmed in unfamiliar places. The drive took about 5 hours. I turned off the highway just past a dead gas station and followed a narrow dirt road until the gravel thinned out into a beaten path. The area wasn't an official campground. There were no picnic tables or signposts, just juniper trees, rocky outcrops, and bone-dry wind. I parked my truck behind a low ridge where it wouldn't be visible from the road, then walked about 20 minutes to find a decent patch of flat ground. I set up my tent near a bend in a dry creek bed, surrounded by sagebrush and scattered pine. It was exactly what I needed. No sounds but the breeze, birds, and the occasional rustle of brush lizards darting out of the sun. I spent the first day walking around, taking in the terrain. It was rugged but manageable. I found a spot up high where I could see out in every direction. There were no other camps nearby.
No tire marks, no footprints.
No wrappers or beer cans. It felt untouched. That night, I cooked beans and rice over a small fire pit I dug out of the dirt. I stayed up watching the sky. It was quiet, colder than I expected, but peaceful. Around midnight, I crawled into the tent and zipped up, listening to the night. I didn't fall asleep quickly, but when I finally did, I slept hard. The next morning was normal. Clear skies, dry air. My cooler was untouched. I made instant coffee and walked the perimeter of my camp again. Around noon, I spotted something odd about 30 yards from where I'd left my tent. A small pile of rocks, stacked, not fallen. Too even to be natural. It hadn't been there the day before. The rocks were flat, maybe 4 or 5 inches wide, stacked 5 high, clean, no moss or dirt on them. It didn't scare me right away. I figured it was just something I hadn't noticed. Maybe some hiker had come through and left it behind. That evening, I made a fire again, sat in my chair, and kept my rifle close by. The quiet felt a little different that night, like something in the background had gone missing. I couldn't hear crickets or birds, just wind, the kind of silence that makes your ears feel full. I tried not to think about it, but I kept looking at the edges of the firelight, scanning for movement. I stayed up later than usual, probably past 2 a.m., just staring out into the trees. I slept light that night, waking every hour or so. At one point, just before dawn, I heard movement near the creek bed, something stepping on twigs, slow and careful. Not a deer, not a rabbit. The steps were paced like a person. Not fast, not stomping, just deliberate. I stayed completely still, holding my breath, listening. The steps came closer. I grabbed my flashlight and clicked it on through the tent wall. Nothing. Silence again. I waited. My heart was racing. Eventually, I heard the steps move away, fading into the brush. That morning, I walked out to the spot where I'd heard the steps.
No prints.
But a second stack of rocks had appeared, identical to the first. Same size, same shape, just 10 yards farther from camp. I stared at it for a long time, then kicked it over. Something about it felt wrong. It was too neat, too deliberate. I looked around again. Still no signs of people.
No voices.
No tire tracks.
No trash.
My phone had no signal, but I kept it in my pocket anyway. That day, I didn't hike far. I stayed close to camp, keeping my rifle in my hands the whole time. I didn't even bother with a fire that night. I sat in my chair in the dark, wrapped in my jacket, listening. The wind was picking up, and dust kept blowing across the tent. I couldn't see much past the trees. Every few minutes, I thought I heard something moving behind me, just quick snaps of branches or brush. Then nothing. At around 11 p.m., I finally stood up and moved into the tent. I lay down with the rifle beside me, the flashlight in my hand, and my boots on. I didn't bother to unzip the sleeping bag. I wanted to be able to move quickly if I had to. It took hours to fall asleep, and even when I did, I woke up to the sound of breathing. Not mine, outside the tent. Slow, uneven. It was low and rough, like someone who'd been running and then tried to stand still. I didn't move. I kept my eyes open and waited. My heart was hammering. I didn't shine the light yet. I wanted to be sure it wasn't the wind or an animal. Then the tent moved just a little, like something was testing the fabric, dragging fingers across it slowly. I shot up, unzipped the flap, and shone the flashlight out fast. Nothing, but the third rock pile was there now, 15 feet from the tent, freshly stacked. I lost it for a second and fired a warning shot into the air. The sound echoed down the hills. Nothing moved, nothing ran, but I knew someone was out there. Not a ghost, not some monster, a man, watching, testing. I didn't sleep again after that. As soon as the light came up, I packed everything fast. Tent, chair, cooler. I left the fire pit and stomped the rocks into the ground. I hiked straight back to the truck, which was still where I left it, though there were fresh prints near the tires, barefoot. Large, clean like they hadn't been walking far. I drove out without looking back. I didn't go to the police. What would I say? That someone followed me, watched me, stacked rocks? There were no threats, no crime, just this feeling that whoever or whatever that was, they wanted me to know they were there, that they could get close without me hearing, that they could wait. I told myself it was just some lunatic who lived out there, a hermit or a drifter, but part of me still sees those footprints, clean, fresh.
But
I haven't gone camping since, not alone, not even near Utah. I started locking my apartment door every night. I check under my truck before I get in. I don't go hiking without friends. And every now and then, When the wind is just right and the woods are quiet, I get that same full feeling in my ears, like the sound is being swallowed. And I remember the shape of those rock piles. Too neat to be random, too human to be nature, too close to be chance. Whatever was out there, it wasn't a myth. It wasn't a spirit. It was a person still living who knew that fear doesn't come from being chased. It comes from knowing you're being watched and that the watcher never blinks. It was late August 2013. I had just turned 32. I remember that clearly because I booked the camping trip as a sort of quiet birthday gift to myself. Nothing fancy, just a few nights in a quiet part of the Peak District. I lived in Nottingham at the time and worked as a delivery driver, so I saw enough of the roads and the city on a daily basis. I wanted silence, trees, and maybe some rain on the roof of my tent. Something peaceful. The plan was simple. Park the car at a quiet levee, hike 4 miles in with my gear, set up somewhere legal but far enough from the main trails that no one would bother me. I wasn't new to camping. I'd done Dartmoor the year before and survived a week of wind and sideways rain. This was supposed to be easier. Dry, quiet, and alone. That's what I wanted. I set off on a Thursday morning, parked near a small village called Earl Sterndale, and followed a trail into the hills. It was still warm, the last stretch of summer clinging on. I didn't pass anyone on the way in. The air smelled of dry grass and sheep dung. I liked that. I didn't need any views. I just needed to not hear engines or phones or people arguing over shopping lists. By 4 p.m., I had my tent set up in a flat patch behind a small row of trees. Not thick woods, just enough coverage to feel tucked away. My tent was an old olive green one-man bivvy with just enough room to sit up inside. I set up my little gas stove, brewed some tea, and sat back against a tree with my boots off. I felt good. Nothing about that first night was strange. It got cold fast once the sun dropped. I ate a tin of beans and listened to the wind pass through the trees, then climbed into my sleeping bag and drifted off not long after dark. No noises, no problems. But the second night didn't go the same. Around 1 in the morning, I woke up with that sharp, alert feeling, like my brain knew something had changed. There was no thunder or sudden wind, but something had woken me. I stayed still for a minute trying to figure it out. I unzipped the top half of my sleeping bag and sat up slowly. I could hear the trees. I could hear my own breath. But there was something else. A rhythmic crunch of dry grass. Slow, steady. Not a deer. Not a fox. 2-footed. Someone was walking out there. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. My heart picked up speed, but I kept calm. I didn't want to unzip the tent. Not yet. The footsteps came closer, then stopped. I waited. I held my breath. A twig snapped, close. Too close. Now, I've had people pass near my tent before on campsites. You can usually hear the casual tone in their steps, or the conversation, or the rustle of their gear. This wasn't like that. This was slow, quiet, deliberate. I stayed frozen for 10 minutes, maybe more. No more footsteps. Nothing. Eventually, I eased back into my bag and stayed awake the rest of the night. I didn't hear them leave, which was worse than if they had sprinted off into the woods. When morning finally came, I unzipped the tent and stepped out, blinking into the light. The trees were still. The sky was gray. My stove and bag were untouched. No signs of anyone around me. Still, something about the grass right in front of my tent didn't sit right. It was pressed down, like someone had stood there for a while. Not walked through, stood, facing the tent. I walked in a small circle and scanned the area, but I didn't see any prints or gear or trash. I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe a farmer walking by. Maybe I'd imagined most of it in my half-sleep. But I packed my stuff quickly anyway. I moved my camp a full mile further into the hills. Different angle, less open ground, more trees between me and the trail. It made me feel better. Not safe, just slightly less watched. That night, it started to rain. Not hard, just a constant light drizzle. The sound on the tent roof helped calm me. I made a hot meal and even managed to relax a bit, thinking the footsteps had been a one-time thing. But I was wrong. Around midnight, I was still awake, just lying in my bag, when I heard something again. This time it was clearer footsteps on wet leaves, coming from behind my tent, then stopping, then shifting slightly, a soft squish of boots in soaked earth, closer than before. I didn't sit up. I just stared at the roof of the tent and waited. Then something touched the tent wall. A finger pushed the thin fabric in slightly, right where my head was. I didn't move. It stayed there for a full 10 seconds, maybe more. Then it pulled back. I don't know how I stayed quiet. Every part of my body was screaming to bolt. But I waited, and eventually the sounds faded away. I didn't sleep. I didn't even close my eyes. When the first light hit, I threw my stuff together in a rush, skipped breakfast, and started hiking out. The walk back took over an hour. The sky was low and gray, and the drizzle never stopped. About halfway down the trail, just before the road, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. A small, soaked scrap of red fabric caught in a bush near the path. I almost ignored it, but something made me stop. It was a torn bit of shirt, faded red cotton, ripped along one side. Too clean to be there long, too dry underneath to be from last year. I didn't touch it. When I reached the road, my car was exactly where I left it. But now, the side mirror was turned all the way in, and someone had wiped a line across the fogged-up window on the driver's side. Not a full handprint, just one line, like someone had dragged a single finger across it. The kind of thing you might not even notice if you weren't already on edge. I got in and drove. I didn't stop until I reached a petrol station on the A6 near Buxton. I sat in the car park for 20 minutes, just watching the mirrors. I never reported it. What would I even say? I heard a man near my tent. Someone touched the side of it at night. There wasn't enough for the police to do anything with. Nothing had been stolen. No one had been hurt. But I never went camping alone after that. Not once. Even now, I still check my windows before I go to sleep. Not for ghosts or creatures, just in case some quiet man is out there, walking through the woods with no torch, standing just out of sight, listening to the rain, and waiting. I was 34 when it happened. This was back in 2018, late September. I had taken a week off work and planned a solo camping trip in northern Georgia, near the Chattahoochee National Forest. I needed a break from people. I'd just gotten out of a long relationship, and I thought being away from everything would help clear my head. I didn't want to stay at a public campsite where there would be families, generators, and the usual crowd. I wanted real solitude. So I planned a route about 5 miles off any marked trail, deep into the woods, near an old logging road I'd found on a satellite map. I parked my truck off a gravel forest road in the early morning and hiked most of the day with a heavy pack. Tent, food, a little camping stove, basic gear. By late afternoon, I had found a flat patch of ground near a dry creek bed. The leaves were already starting to fall, and the area was quiet except for the occasional bird or squirrel. I set up my tent, boiled water for dinner, and sat by the small fire I built from twigs and deadfall. The first night was calm, cold but nothing unusual. I slept fine. The second night, though, was when it started. That afternoon, I had hiked another mile or so east of camp just to look around. I wasn't following any trail, just going by compass. Around mid-afternoon, I came across something odd. A thick patch of small pine trees that seemed younger than the rest of the forest. They were all lined up strangely, in unnatural rows. I stopped and looked around, thinking maybe it had been part of a replanting effort after logging. But there were also old, rusted cans and glass bottles half buried in the dirt, and I even found an old metal folding chair collapsed under a tree. It didn't look like anyone had been back there in years, but there was definitely a man-made clearing there at one point. I didn't stay long. It just felt strange. The air was heavier in that part of the forest. Could have just been my mood, but something about it made me uneasy. I made my way back to my camp before dark and tried not to think too much about it. That night, I woke up around 2 a.m. I didn't know why. I wasn't cold, and there hadn't been any loud noise. I just opened my eyes, fully awake. I sat up and listened. It was dead quiet outside. No wind, no insects, nothing. That's what struck me first. Total silence. Even in remote woods, there's always some kind of background noise. But this was still, too still. Then I heard a crack, like a footstep on dry branches. Not right next to my tent, but maybe 30 feet away. I froze. I didn't have a weapon besides a hatchet, and my flashlight was buried in my pack by my feet. I sat still for what felt like forever, listening. Another crack, then silence, then something brushing against leaves. It wasn't an animal. I've camped enough to know how raccoons or deer move. This was slower, controlled. I didn't call out. I didn't even breathe heavy. I stayed sitting up still until the sounds faded again. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. When daylight came, I unzipped the tent slowly and looked around. I couldn't see anything out of place. I walked in a wide circle around my camp. No obvious tracks, nothing disturbed. But the feeling stayed with me. I was being watched. I boiled water for coffee with shaky hands and made a decision. I'd pack up and hike out by noon. It wasn't worth the risk to stay out there alone. As I was packing, I noticed something I had missed earlier. About 20 feet from my tent, there was a clean vertical cut on the trunk of a sapling. Chest height. It looked fresh, not like from a falling branch or animal scrape. A knife, clean and even. I hadn't done that, and it hadn't been there the day before. I got moving faster after that. By early afternoon, I had broken down camp and was heading back toward where I had parked. I had marked trees with strips of orange tape on the way in, and I followed them back, staying alert. I didn't listen to music. I didn't take breaks. I just kept moving. About halfway back, I noticed another thing out of place. One of the orange strips I had tied around a tree was gone. Just one. The others were still there. But that one had been taken off, and there was a footprint in the mud near it. Big, worn tread, probably a boot. Could have been mine, except it was pointed toward my path in, not out. I kept going, now pushing harder, my legs burning from the weight and speed. It was getting close to evening when I reached the gravel road where I'd left the truck. But when I got there, something else was wrong. My back window had been broken. Not shattered, just a clean hole like someone had jabbed it with a pipe or crowbar. My glove box was open. The seat had been moved back. My spare keys were gone. The truck still started with my main keys, but I sat there for a long time, sweating and watching the tree line. I knew it had to be connected. Someone had been out there, watching me, maybe from the first night, maybe even before I arrived. And they had followed me. They hadn't tried to take the truck. They hadn't stolen anything of value, but they had gone through it, sat in it, watched. I didn't tell the police. There wasn't much to say. No one was hurt. Nothing was really stolen. The area was remote, and I had no proof of anything. Just a few broken things and bad feelings. I never went back to that part of the forest. In fact, I stopped camping alone completely after that. I still go out with friends sometimes in safer areas closer to known trails, but never alone. Not that deep. I don't know who it was out there. Maybe someone living off-grid. Maybe just someone who enjoys messing with people. But they were careful. quiet, patient, and they knew the woods better than I did. What still gets to me even now is how subtle it all was. They didn't need to do anything loud or violent. They just let me know they were there. A step at night, a missing marker, a knife mark on a tree. That's all it took to get into my head. And it worked. It was late September of 2016 when I decided to take a solo camping trip into the Utah backcountry. I was 34 then, living alone in Idaho Falls, working a simple job at an auto body shop. I'd been feeling burned out from the routine, tired of the noise of town, and I needed a quiet break. I chose a spot in the southern part of Utah, near a little place called Boulder. Most people think of arches and red rocks when they hear Utah. But if you get far enough into the high desert, you can find big stretches of pine forest and sandstone canyons that feel like they go on forever. I had an old Chevy Blazer I'd been fixing up, and it made the trip without much complaint. I brought enough food for 4 days, water jugs, my .38 revolver, just in case, and a beat-up canvas tent I'd used a dozen times before. There was no cell signal out there. I liked it that way. The forest road I followed stretched deep into the Escalante region, way off any highway. After driving for about 2 hours down a narrowing dirt path, I finally found a decent clearing just below a sandstone ridge. There were no other vehicles, no other campsites nearby. I hadn't seen a soul since leaving the pavement. The first day went fine. I spent most of it gathering firewood, setting up camp, and hiking a little ways into the pines to get a better view of the cliffs. When the sun dropped behind the ridge, the whole place cooled down fast. I lit a fire and sat on a folding stool, eating a can of chili and sipping some instant coffee. No sound except the crackling of the fire and the wind moving through the branches. I stayed up until maybe 10, then crawled into my sleeping bag and passed out. I woke up sometime during the night. I wasn't sure why. There wasn't a sound, but something felt off. The fire had died down to red coals. I sat up, listening. It might have just been nerves. I was alone, far from anything, and that kind of silence messes with your head. I told myself it was nothing and forced myself to sleep again. The second day, I explored a bit farther down a dry creek bed that twisted between two ridges. I walked for hours, taking pictures of old rock layers, lizards, birds, and a small snake that slithered under a rock when I got too close. I didn't bring a map because I'd studied the satellite view before coming, and I'm usually good with directions. I made sure to loop back toward camp before sunset. As I came back up the creek bed, climbing back over the ridge near my site, I stopped. Someone had been there. There was a fresh footprint in the soft dust between some rocks. It wasn't mine. I was wearing hiking boots with thick, squared tread. This one had a different pattern, smaller, like a running shoe. It wasn't an animal either. It was too perfect. I looked around for more and found one more near a juniper bush, maybe 10 feet away, and that was it. I stood there for a long time trying to think. I hadn't heard anyone. I hadn't seen another vehicle, but someone had definitely been nearby while I was gone. I walked back to camp more alert than before, scanning the woods, looking up to the ridge line. Nothing. My camp looked untouched. My gear was where I left it. No tracks around the fire pit, nothing near my tent. Still, I didn't feel relaxed anymore. That night, I kept the fire going longer. I ate in silence, facing the dark tree line. Every sound, the pop of wood, the rustle of wind, made me glance over my shoulder. I didn't sleep much. I laid there, eyes open, listening for any sound out of place. In the early morning, just as the sky started to lighten, I stepped out of the tent. The fire was cold, my body stiff from half sleep. I walked a slow circle around my camp, checking again for tracks or signs that someone had come closer. Nothing. I told myself maybe it was an old footprint. Maybe someone had been through a week ago, and it just hadn't been washed away by rain. Still, I decided I'd leave that day instead of staying the full 4. I started packing up after breakfast. It was around 9 a.m., and the sun had just made it over the ridge. I was folding the tent when I looked up, just a casual glance up the ridge, and froze. There was a man standing at the top. He was far enough that I couldn't see much detail, maybe 200 feet away, but he was clearly watching me. He wasn't moving, just standing still, arms at his sides. He looked like he was wearing dark pants and a hooded sweatshirt. No pack, no visible gear, no camera. Just standing there, completely still, facing me. I stayed frozen for maybe 10 seconds. Then I looked away, pretending I hadn't seen him, heart racing like crazy. When I looked back again, he was gone. Just like that. No sound, no movement. Gone. I didn't care what he was doing or why he was there. I threw the rest of my stuff into the blazer without folding it. Didn't even bother finishing my coffee. I got in, turned the engine over, and drove the hell out of there. I didn't stop until I hit the pavement again, and even then, I drove another hour before pulling into a gas station. I looked behind me more times on that drive than I ever had before. I checked my mirrors constantly. I kept thinking maybe I'd see a vehicle tailing me or the guy walking along the roadside, but there was nothing. I never reported it. What would I even say? There was a guy standing on a rock, and it freaked me out. There was no crime, no proof. Just a weird footprint and a man who never made a sound. But the part that still gets to me is how quiet he was. No slipping on rocks, no breaking twigs, no clearing his throat or shifting weight. Just silence, like he knew how to stay hidden, like he had done this before. He didn't try to scare me. He didn't approach. He didn't run when I saw him. He just stood there, watching. I still camp, but I don't go alone anymore. And I never, ever camp somewhere I can't leave in under 5 minutes. I've thought about that man more times than I care to admit. What he was doing, how long he had been there, if he had watched me the night I woke up. I think about that single footprint and the way he vanished from the ridge like he had melted into the rocks. And I know in my gut that I wasn't the first person he had watched out there, and I might not have been the last. It was the summer of 2017, and I was 32 at the time, living in Southern Oregon. I had a week off from work, and I wanted to get away from everything. No emails, no phone calls, no people. I packed up my gear, loaded my dog Cash into the back of my old Tacoma, and drove out into the Umpqua National Forest. I'd heard from a guy at work about a fire watchtower that was decommissioned years ago. He said there was a clearing not far from it that made a good spot to camp. No official trails led there anymore, but if you followed a dirt forestry road long enough and hiked another couple of miles, you'd find it. That was exactly what I wanted. The road was rough, barely even a road after the first few miles. The deeper I went, the more overgrown it got. Branches scraped the sides of the truck. I was already feeling that tension of being far out, but I reminded myself that was the point. Cash stayed quiet the whole drive, curled up in the back seat with his head down. The last stretch of road was just 2 tire tracks leading up into trees. I parked once I couldn't go any further and hiked the rest with my pack and rifle slung over my shoulder. I wasn't planning on hunting, but in those woods, it's good to carry something. Bears, cougars, you never really know. After about 2 hours of walking, I found the clearing. It was quiet. I could see the fire tower about 100 yards off through the trees. It was weather-beaten and looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. The stairs were mostly gone and the platform sagged. Still, it was a striking thing to come across in the middle of nowhere. I set up camp near the tree line, not directly under the tower, but close enough to keep it in view. The first night was uneventful. I made a small fire, cooked some beans, and listened to the forest wind down. Cash laid next to me, ears twitching occasionally. He wasn't a nervous dog, but out there he stayed alert. Every now and then, he'd look up and stare off into the trees. I chalked it up to deer or raccoons. I slept fine the first night, though I woke up once to Cash growling low. It wasn't loud, but it was steady. I reached out and put a hand on him and he stopped. I listened for a while but didn't hear anything. Just the normal noises of the forest. I assumed it was nothing. The second day I explored a bit. I went to the tower and looked around underneath. Some old rusted tools, cigarette butts, broken glass. The place hadn't been maintained in a long time. I didn't try to climb it. There was no point, it wasn't safe. From the base, though, I could see a long stretch of hills through a gap in the trees. The wind up there carried strange sounds. Not voices or anything like that, just weird shifts in tone. Like something was moving through the trees far off, but I couldn't pinpoint it. That night, I noticed Cash acting strange. He wouldn't leave the tent. He kept staring out toward the trees behind the fire tower. His ears were stiff, and every time I moved, he would get up like he was ready to bolt. I sat by the fire for an hour just watching that spot. Nothing moved.
No branches snapped.
Still, I had that feeling. The kind where your body knows something's wrong before your brain catches up. I put the fire out early and went into the tent. I kept the rifle next to me, more out of habit than fear at that point. But I didn't sleep well. Every small sound outside the tent felt too loud. The wind felt too fast. And sometime after midnight, Cash growled again, louder this time. I sat up, heart pounding. I listened. There was a sound. Slow, heavy footsteps crunching leaves. Not animal. Not quick like a deer. Not soft like a bear. It was steady. Too steady. I didn't move. My mind raced, trying to justify it. Another camper? A ranger? But this was too far from anything. No marked trails. No vehicles could get close. Who would walk this deep in the dark? The footsteps stopped. Then nothing for what felt like a full minute. Then they started again, closer this time. Cash barked once, sharp and loud. I unzipped the tent slowly and poked my head out. It was pitch black beyond the fire pit. I didn't see anything, but I heard it breathing. Not animal breathing, just a person. Slow, calm, controlled, like they knew I was there and didn't care. I raised the rifle and pointed it toward the sound. I didn't say anything. I didn't move. I just waited. The breathing went quiet. Then there was a rustling sound, something pulling back into the trees. I didn't sleep at all after that. At first light, I packed up camp. I didn't make breakfast. I didn't even drink water. I shoved everything into the pack and got moving. Cash stayed close, tail low. I wasn't even halfway down the trail before I noticed something that stopped me cold. Footprints. Not mine. Not from my boots. These were bare. Human. Wide steps. Deep impressions in the damp dirt. They followed the trail in the same direction I was going, but they came from the direction of my camp. Someone had been out there, watching me. I kept moving, rifle in hand. Every 30 steps or so, I looked over my shoulder. Once I saw movement. I'm not even sure what it was. Maybe just a tree swaying. Maybe not. The sun came out and that helped a little. I made it back to the truck by mid-morning. I threw the pack in the back and slammed the tailgate shut as hard as I could. Started the truck. Got out of there without even checking the tires or mirrors. I didn't stop until I hit the highway almost 40 miles later. I didn't report it. What would I say? Someone walked near my tent? There was no real proof. No crime. Just that feeling I couldn't shake. The strangest part came later when I told the guy at work, the one who'd mentioned the fire tower, that I'd camped near it. He looked confused. Said he must have remembered the location wrong. Said the tower he was talking about had been torn down 5 years earlier. He'd never even been out there himself. I looked it up online after. The tower I camped near didn't show up on any recent maps. The old records said it was last manned in 1994. After that, it wasn't maintained, and eventually it was left off newer forestry charts. I think that's why someone chose to be out there. Someone who didn't want to be found. Someone who knew people rarely came that deep anymore. I haven't camped alone since. I still hike, still go off-trail now and then, but not overnight. Not in places that feel like they've been forgotten. And I always trust Cash now. If he growls at something in the dark, I don't ask questions. I just pack up and go. It was the summer of 2012 when a group of us decided to go camping in the high desert of northern Arizona. We were in our early 20s, most of us working dead-end jobs or doing summer classes, trying to hold on to whatever freedom we had left before life dragged us under. There were 5 of us, me, Darren, Mike, Luis, and Ian. We weren't hardcore hikers or anything. We just wanted a quiet weekend away from traffic, phones, and work. Somewhere remote. Somewhere we could drink, build a fire, and tell stories like we did back in high school. Luis had heard of a spot near the edge of the Navajo Nation, just past a 2-track trail that cut through stretches of dry juniper and sandstone. He said his uncle used to camp up there during hunting season. Said it was flat, overlooked a small canyon, and nobody ever went up that way anymore. Sounded perfect. We drove up in 2 trucks, loaded with tents, coolers, sleeping bags, and enough food and beer to last 3 nights. The trail was rough, full of sharp rocks and dry ruts that rattled our bones. No cell signal, no lights, not even old fence lines. Just a whole lot of open land and red dirt stretching out in every direction. When we finally stopped, it was late afternoon. The sun was heavy and low, making long shadows on the ground. We parked on a small ridge overlooking the canyon Luis talked about. Below, the land dipped into a snaking gully full of cottonwoods and scattered rocks. Behind us was flat desert with short trees and grass that rattled in the wind. The air smelled like dust and pine sap. We pitched our tents in a loose circle around the fire pit we built with scavenged rocks. I picked a spot slightly away from the others, less crowded, better breeze. By sundown, we had a fire going, burgers on the grill, and music coming from a little Bluetooth speaker. We sat around, drinking and laughing, the sky slowly fading into a deep purple. One by one, the stars came out. It was one of those rare nights where you could see the Milky Way stretched across the sky like a smear of paint. At some point, Ian started telling stories. He had this thing for native folklore, skinwalkers, wendigos, stuff like that. I didn't pay much attention. Most of it sounded like campfire filler. Besides, I didn't believe in that kind of stuff. I grew up with my feet on the ground. Logic, not legend. But still, there was something about the way his voice dropped when he mentioned certain things, like people seeing something wearing a man's face or animals walking like humans. That made me feel weird. We went to bed sometime after midnight. I was buzzed, but not drunk. Tired, but still alert. The fire was low, but still throwing off enough heat. I crawled into my tent, zipped it shut, and lay on top of my bag, letting the cool air settle over me. It was quiet, real quiet, not even crickets, just the occasional gust of wind blowing through the dry grass and the rustle of nylon as the tents shifted slightly. I woke up maybe 2 hours later. I didn't check my phone, but the moon had moved and everything was bathed in a pale silver light. Something felt off. I don't know how else to say it. It was like my body knew something my brain hadn't caught up to yet. That weird, gut-tightening feeling like when someone's watching you. At first, I thought I heard footsteps, not heavy ones, more like soft, dragging steps moving across gravel. I held my breath and listened. Nothing. Then a minute later, I heard it again, closer this time, like someone walking barefoot through the brush. I slowly unzipped the flap of my tent just an inch or two and looked out. The fire had died to glowing coals. Everything looked normal. Darren was still in his tent. I could see the shape of Mike's feet sticking out of his bag. But there was something by the edge of the trees, just at the line where the moonlight hit the junipers. A figure, not tall, not bulky, just a person-sized shadow, standing still, facing our camp. I stayed frozen for a while. I told myself it was a trick of the light, maybe a tree stump or a boulder. But then it moved. It didn't walk exactly. It sort of shifted, like it was adjusting its posture. Its arms hung low. It was hunched a little. And the way it moved, I don't know how to describe it. It was too fluid, like someone trying to walk silently but forgetting how a human body is supposed to move. I thought about waking the others, but I didn't want to sound crazy. Besides, I wasn't even sure what I was seeing. It didn't get closer. It just stayed at the edge, shifting occasionally, sometimes crouching low, sometimes rising back up. Always watching. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep. I don't remember when. I just remember waking up again to the sound of birds. The sun was rising, pale and orange on the horizon. The others were still asleep, except Luis, who was making coffee over the fire. I didn't say anything. All day, I kept glancing back toward the trees. Nothing there, just heat and silence. We went hiking along the canyon rim, took pictures, skipped rocks. The whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, not followed, just observed, like someone was hiding just beyond our view, keeping track of everything we did. That night, I set up my tent closer to the group. I didn't mention the figure. I just said it was windier on the ridge. We built the fire higher and stayed up later, drank more, tried to drown out the stillness. Sometime after midnight, I had to take a leak, so I grabbed a flashlight and walked away from the fire, just far enough to get some privacy. I was maybe 30 feet out when I heard it again. Footsteps, not behind me but to my right, just off the trail behind some brush. I froze. I clicked off my flashlight. There was breathing, not close, not heavy, just soft, like someone trying to stay quiet. I crouched and waited. My heart was pounding so hard it made my vision shake. Slowly, I turned the flashlight back on and shined it toward the sound. Nothing, just trees and dry grass and a few scattered rocks. I stood there for a long minute, then slowly backed away toward the fire. The next morning, there were tracks. Luis noticed them first. Bare footprints, human, wide-spaced, as if someone had been running or loping through the camp. They weren't fresh enough to tell which direction they came from, but they were big and odd. The toes were too long, the heel too narrow, and whoever left them hadn't worn shoes. We followed them about 20 yards into the trees before they vanished. The ground got too hard, too rocky, but I could feel it. Whatever had been watching us was real. It had come close. We packed up that afternoon. Nobody said much. It wasn't fun anymore. I think we all felt it. That pressure in the air, that weight on your shoulders when you know something's wrong but you can't name it. When we got back to town, I took a long shower, ate a real meal, and lay in bed for hours, just staring at the ceiling. I didn't tell anyone what I saw until weeks later. And even then, I left things out. No one wants to sound crazy, but I know what I saw. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't some shapeshifter or ancient legend. It was a man or something close enough. Someone who lived out there beyond the boundaries. Someone who watched from the trees, who moved wrong, who waited. I don't go camping much anymore. Not in places without fences. Not where the ground is quiet and the nights are too dark. And never near the Navajo line. Not again. It was the summer of 2017, and I had just turned 24. Life had been dragging me down for a while. Long work weeks, noise, people, constant stress. So, I booked a few days off and planned a solo camping trip. Nothing dramatic, just a quiet, remote spot in the Lake District in northern England. I camped there once with friends 2 years earlier, and I remembered it being peaceful. Rolling hills, trees, and long, empty trails that seemed to stretch on forever. This time I wanted to be completely alone. No friends, no phone reception, just me and nature. I picked a spot that was about a 45-minute hike from the nearest road. I parked the car at a small lay-by near a bend in the road, threw my rucksack over my shoulder, and started walking. It was late afternoon when I reached the spot. A gentle slope opened into a clearing surrounded by thin trees, with a view of the moors behind it. The nearest building was likely a shepherd's hut miles off, and I hadn't passed a single person on the trail. I pitched my small tent on a patch of flattened grass, laid out my sleeping bag inside, and set up a small fire pit. The air was cool, fresh, the kind that feels like it scrubs your lungs clean. Birds chirped lightly, the trees swayed softly, and everything just felt right. The first night passed quietly. I made some noodles, read a paperback novel by flashlight, and slept well. The second day, I went for a long walk up one of the nearby ridges. No paths, just navigating using the landmarks I remembered and a small compass clipped to my pack. I saw some deer at a distance, a fox darting through bracken, and a few hawks overhead. Felt good to move without rushing. That evening, as I returned to the tent, I noticed something odd, small, fresh footprints on the soft ground not far from my tent. They weren't mine. I was wearing heavy hiking boots, and these prints were narrower, lighter, almost like someone walking in cheap trainers. I told myself someone must have wandered through and kept going. There were trails nearby after all. Still, it made the hair on my neck stand up a little. I scanned the trees as the sun dipped lower but didn't see or hear anything unusual. I tried to shake it off. That night, I didn't sleep as soundly. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of twigs snapping outside the tent. Not just one or two, several. Something or someone was walking nearby. I stayed completely still, holding my breath. No animals I knew of walked slowly like that. Not with 2 feet. I waited, ears straining, heart pounding. After a minute or two, the steps faded, and all was quiet again. I told myself it was probably a badger or a deer. Eventually, I drifted back to sleep, though not fully relaxed. The next morning, I noticed more footprints. These were closer now, leading around the side of my tent, curving behind it. Still not mine. I looked around for any sign of a person. Nothing. No voices, no movement, no sign of life. I hadn't seen anyone in 2 days. There was a weird tension in the air that I couldn't shake. I ate a quick breakfast and decided to explore further, partly to see if I could spot anyone, partly to clear my head. I climbed another ridge, taking a wide loop through the woods. After about an hour, I saw something that made my stomach twist. Hanging on a branch about chest height was a plastic bag, a cheap white shopping bag. Inside, a pair of old trainers and a folded jacket. I stared at it for a while, then slowly backed away. It wasn't litter. Someone had put it there on purpose. I turned and made my way straight back to the camp. Not running, but not walking slow either. When I reached my tent, nothing had changed at first. But then I noticed something small and strange. The zipper on my tent wasn't closed all the way, just about 3 inches open. I always sealed it shut completely. Always. I looked inside. Nothing was missing, but the sleeping bag was unzipped. Again, something I would never leave like that. My water bottle had been moved a few inches too. It didn't feel like an animal. It felt like someone had entered while I was gone. I stood still for a long time, just watching the trees, scanning every inch of the clearing, trying to listen for breathing or movement. The silence was heavier now. I packed up fast. I didn't even bother cooking. I stuffed everything back into my rucksack, broke down the tent, and got ready to head back to the car. It was still mid-afternoon, and I had plenty of daylight left. I followed the same trail I had taken in, moving quickly but not full out running. About 10 minutes down the path, I heard something behind me, a soft crunch, like a footstep on dry leaves. I stopped and turned. Nothing, just trees and bracken. I kept walking a bit faster now. Another sound, closer. I turned again. At first I saw nothing, but then, through a thin gap between two trees, maybe 30 or 40 feet back, I saw a shape. A man. He was partially hidden by branches, just standing still, watching me. He wore a gray hoodie with the hood pulled low and dark trousers. His hands were hanging by his sides. He didn't move. He didn't wave or speak or step forward. Just stood there, half hidden, head slightly tilted. I felt a rush of panic so hard it made my knees weak. I turned and walked faster. No running, I didn't want to look like prey, but I walked like my life depended on it. The sound of steps followed me. Slow, steady, not trying to catch me, just following. I never saw him again directly, but I heard him for at least another 15 minutes. Every time I slowed down, the steps got a little closer. When I sped up, they stayed steady behind me. Eventually, after what felt like forever, I saw the road. My car was parked just where I left it, empty and alone. I almost cried from relief. I didn't look back as I unlocked it, threw the bag into the passenger seat, and climbed in. I drove off fast, not caring if the tires skidded on the gravel. I drove straight to a pub in the next village, not stopping until I saw other people. I sat in the corner and just breathed for a while. Then I got a room at a nearby inn and locked the door tight. I didn't sleep much. I never reported it to the police. What would I say? A man followed me in the woods? No crime, no name, no face. But I know what I saw and I know what I felt. That man wasn't lost or wandering. He knew I was there. He had been watching me for more than a day, maybe since I arrived. He came close to my tent. He might have stood over me while I slept, and he was still following me when I left. I never went solo camping again, not even in daylight. I still camp sometimes, but always with a group, and never without phone signal. That trip changed how I look at silence. It used to feel peaceful. Now, it makes me think about what might be hiding in it. I still remember every little thing about that weekend. It was late October, just as the trees in northern Georgia were turning bright shades of orange and red. I was 27 years old then, working a dull desk job in Atlanta and desperate for a break from the noise and traffic. I'd been camping all my life and knew how to handle myself outdoors, so I didn't think twice about heading out alone for a long weekend. I wanted peace and quiet. No phones, no people, no distractions. Just a tent, a fire, and the woods. I chose a remote spot near a creek in the Chattahoochee National Forest, not far from a place called Helton Creek. It was far enough off the trail that I wouldn't see anyone, but not so far that I couldn't hike out in a few hours if something went wrong. I parked my truck at a gravel pull-off, slung my pack over my shoulders, and hiked a couple miles through dense woods until I found a flat area near the creek. It was perfect. The sound of the water helped drown out everything else, and the air was cool and clean. I pitched my tent between two thick oaks, gathered some firewood, and settled in. The first night was uneventful. I cooked some beans and rice over my little stove, sat by the fire until it burned low, then crawled into my sleeping bag. I remember feeling good, really good actually, like my body had let out a deep breath it had been holding for months. I slept hard. The next morning, I hiked upstream to collect water and did some fishing, caught a couple of small trout and cooked them for lunch. Around midday, the wind picked up and started blowing dead leaves all over the place. I bundled up in my jacket, sat near the fire, and just watched the woods. It was peaceful. almost too peaceful, like the trees were watching me back. That second night, I stayed up later than usual, just staring at the fire. Around 10 or 11, the wind died completely. I noticed because it got quiet, like dead quiet. No rustling, no insects. Not even the water seemed as loud. I sat there for a while, feeling like something was off. Eventually, I shook it off and went to bed. The weird thing is, I woke up around 3 in the morning for no reason. I was just wide awake, heart pounding in my chest. I lay there listening. That's when I thought I heard something out by the creek. It sounded like whispering, not words exactly, more like the hushed sound of breath and rustling clothes. I told myself it was probably a raccoon or maybe a deer, but the sound didn't move like an animal. It stayed in one spot for too long. I stayed still, every muscle tense, trying not to breathe too loud. After about 5 minutes, the sound stopped. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. By morning, the normal sounds of the forest returned. Birds chirping, squirrels running through the leaves, the creek gurgling. I convinced myself I'd just imagined it. Maybe a dream, maybe the wind playing tricks on me. I made breakfast, packed a day bag, and decided to hike further up the ridge just to get some space and clear my head. I followed a faint game trail that curved up into a stretch of pines. As I climbed, I started seeing signs that someone else had been there recently. Boot prints in the mud, broken branches, even a cigarette butt. Nothing alarming, just signs that I wasn't as alone as I thought. I kept going until I reached a high overlook where I could see the creek valley below. I stayed up there for hours. It was quiet and still, and I started to feel more like myself again. But as I came back down late that afternoon, I noticed something strange near my campsite. A pile of stones, small, smooth creek rocks, stacked neatly in a circle beside my tent. I hadn't put them there. I would have noticed something like that. They weren't just tossed either. They were arranged carefully, almost like a tiny fire ring, but smaller, more like a marker. I stood there staring at it for a long time. I looked around, scanned the woods, listened. Nothing, just the breeze and the sound of water. I kicked the stones apart and sat down near the fire pit. My brain was racing, trying to come up with explanations. Maybe a prank? But I hadn't seen a single person since I got there. No cars, no voices, no distant barking dogs. Just woods. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my bag, wide awake, clutching my knife and flashlight. I kept listening, waiting. Around 2 in the morning, I heard it again, the whispering. This time, it was closer, just outside the tent. My heart thumped so loud I thought whoever or whatever was out there would hear it. I held my breath. The whispering wasn't words. It was soft, like 2 people breathing into each other's ears. Slow, steady, never quite stopping. I didn't unzip the tent. Couldn't. I just waited, trying to convince myself that it was wind or water or some trick of acoustics. After what felt like forever, the sound faded. I stayed in that tent until daylight, barely moving. When morning came, I opened the tent and checked around. There were no footprints, no sign of anyone, but another stack of stones had appeared, this time just a foot away from my tent door. That was enough. I packed everything. I didn't eat, didn't drink. Just threw my gear into my pack, stomped out the fire, and left. I hiked fast, faster than I probably should have with the load I was carrying, but I didn't care. I just wanted out. Every step I took, I kept checking over my shoulder. I didn't hear anything, didn't see anything, but I felt something behind me the whole way. I made it back to my truck by early afternoon and didn't stop driving until I hit the outskirts of Atlanta. When I got home, I took a long shower, drank 2 bottles of water, and sat on the couch for hours, just staring at nothing. My body was safe, but my brain couldn't settle. Something had happened out there, something that didn't make sense. The next weekend, I checked forums and posts online to see if anyone else had experienced anything strange near Helton Creek. I didn't find much, just a few scattered comments from years ago. One guy mentioned finding weird markers near his camp. Another said he heard whispering and never went back. A woman posted about hearing someone walking circles around her tent at night, though she thought it was a bear. I never reported it. I didn't tell my family or my friends. They wouldn't understand. They'd tell me it was just in my head, that I imagined it. But I didn't. I haven't been camping alone since then. I still go out sometimes, but always with a group, always somewhere known. I don't go deep anymore, not into those woods, not where it gets too quiet, not where people stack stones by your tent in the middle of the night and vanish without a sound. Sometimes I still hear that whispering when I can't sleep. And every now and then, when I close my eyes, I see the circle of stones. And I wonder what would have happened if I had stayed one more night. I don't plan to find out. I was 28 the summer I decided to spend 3 days hiking and camping alone in the western part of Wyoming, near Bridger Teton National Forest. I just finished a rough year breakup, job stress, family issues. I needed a reset, something to snap me out of the fog I'd been stuck in. I'd grown up around the outdoors and had done plenty of camping and backpacking in the past, so I felt confident going solo. I planned the route carefully. It was a loop trail I found online, about 18 miles round trip, mostly following a river before cutting back through pine woods and rocky hills. The site was remote, but I still registered with the ranger station and gave my route, just in case. I didn't tell many people, just my cousin and one friend, both of whom I texted right before I lost signal. The first day was smooth. I started hiking late in the morning, reached the river around 5 p.m., and found a spot to camp a bit off the trail on a slight hill. The river was about 40 feet down below me, and the sound of the water running over rocks helped me sleep. No issues.
No noises.
Nothing out of place. Day 2 is when things changed. I woke up early, made some oatmeal, and packed up to start the next leg of the loop. The plan was to hike along the river a bit further, then veer off and start making my way up a ridge, following a trail that curved back inland. That trail was supposed to connect me to a more wooded area where I'd camp the second night. I was ahead of schedule and decided to explore a bit. There was an old logging path that branched off from the main trail and led into thicker woods. It wasn't on my map, but it looked well worn enough. I figured it might loop back or at least give me a different view. Honestly, I just wanted to do something off-plan, a break from my normal careful routines. That's when I made my first mistake. About an hour down that logging path, it narrowed into overgrown brush and rocky patches. I thought about turning back, but I figured it wouldn't hurt to go just a bit further before backtracking. But I didn't mark anything, no trail markers, no GPS ping because I had no service, and I didn't drop any kind of breadcrumbs. The trees started to look the same. Thick pine, patches of aspen, ferns on the ground. I stopped for water and realized I hadn't seen a clear trail for maybe 20 minutes. That was the first time I felt something was wrong. Still, I kept pushing ahead, hoping to find a clearer path or some kind of landmark. Nothing. I passed a dead tree with claw marks about shoulder high. Fresh, still a bit wet, like whatever did it hadn't been gone long. Probably a bear. That made me stop cold. I pulled my bear spray from the side pocket of my pack and kept it in my hand. The woods were so still. I noticed how quiet it had gotten, no wind, no birds. Just that dry silence that hangs heavy over pine needles. I stood there a while, listening. Nothing moved. I turned around, trying to retrace my steps, but every direction looked the same. No trail.
No prints.
No broken branches I could swear I remembered. I started to panic, not loud or dramatic, but the kind where your chest tightens and you can't think straight. I tried walking in what I thought was a straight line back. But after another hour, I was deeper in it. Around 3 p.m., I stumbled into a small clearing where the trees thinned out. There were old stumps and a few logs, maybe from logging decades ago. I figured it'd be a decent place to stop, reset, and maybe set up a temporary shelter if I had to. I still had plenty of water, snacks, and even my tent if I needed to stay put and wait until morning. I told myself I'd backtrack the next day when I was rested, but something felt off about that clearing. I dropped my pack and just stood there. It wasn't fear at first, more like tension, like something was watching me, though I hadn't seen anything move. I looked up into the trees, squinting against the sunlight filtering through. Nothing, but the hairs on my neck were standing. My body knew something I didn't. I heard a sharp crack behind me, like a stick being stepped on. I froze, slowly turned. Nothing there, but the brush looked disturbed, flattened. I stared for a long time, gripping the bare spray. The air was heavy and still. I didn't want to sleep in that clearing. I decided to move back into the trees a bit and set up camp under a large pine. It felt safer, slightly more enclosed. I boiled water for a freeze-dried meal but couldn't eat much. I kept scanning the woods while I sat, and as night came, that feeling only got worse. My headlamp only lit about 30 feet ahead. Beyond that was darkness. Every sound felt louder, twigs snapping, rustling, distant water dripping. At one point, maybe around midnight, I woke up to a low thud. Not right next to the tent, but close, heavy, like a step. Then silence. My heart raced and I didn't move. I just lay there listening. I didn't hear anything else, but I couldn't sleep again. At first light, I packed everything in record time. I needed to get out. I tried heading northeast, hoping I'd cross my original path or even the river. But the terrain was uneven, and the more I pushed forward, the more I felt like I was walking in circles. Around 10 a.m., I came to a steep ravine, too deep to climb down easily. I had to follow the edge until I found a safer spot. That's when I saw it. On the other side of the ravine, maybe 50 feet away, something stood among the trees. Not a person, not a bear. It was tall, thin, dressed in dark clothes. Couldn't see a face, just the outline of a human figure, motionless. I ducked instinctively and crouched behind a bush. My pulse was pounding in my ears. Peeked again. The figure hadn't moved, but I noticed something strange. It wasn't looking around or hiking. It was just standing, still, in the same spot, like it had been there a while. Watching, I stayed crouched for maybe 10 minutes, hardly breathing. When I looked again, it was gone. That was enough for me. I started moving fast, not running but close. Every stick snap behind me made me jump. I didn't stop. By late afternoon, I finally hit a familiar slope. The trees changed shape slightly, less underbrush, more sunlight. I followed it and found the trail again, the real trail. Relief hit me so hard I almost cried. I hiked until dusk, finally made it back to the river where I had camped the first night. I didn't set up a tent, just rolled my sleeping bag out behind some rocks and stayed low. I didn't sleep well, but nothing came near. The next morning, I got up early and hiked straight back to the trailhead without stopping. When I reached the ranger station, there was no one there, just a drop box and a couple of old posters on the wall. I signed out, got in my truck, and didn't look back. I never reported what I saw. What could I even say? A man standing in the woods? Could have been another hiker. But I know what I felt. That wasn't someone who got lost or stopped for a break. That was someone or something that knew the woods too well, that had been there longer than me, watching. I haven't been camping alone since. I still hike, sometimes with friends, always with caution. I still think about that figure in the trees, still wonder how close it had been the night before, still wonder if it followed me, and still regret ever leaving the trail. I was 19 when I made the mistake of camping in that graveyard. It was late October of 2013. I had just moved to northern Maine, near a small town called Milford. I was renting a rundown room above an old general store while working part-time at a local lumber yard. The pay was bad, and I didn't know a single soul there, but I was trying to figure things out after dropping out of college a year before. Back then, I was restless. Too many nights alone in that dusty room had me itching to get out. One Friday evening, I heard about this forgotten graveyard about 6 miles outside of town. People didn't really talk about it much, just called it the Old Field or the Pioneer Plot. A guy I worked with briefly mentioned it over lunch break, saying his cousin got drunk once and camped there. Nothing had happened, according to him, but it stuck in my head. Something about sleeping in a place where time had stopped appealed to me. The idea felt edgy, like something I'd remember years later. So, I packed a small hiking bag, a cheap tent, a flashlight, a dull pocket knife, and a bottle of water, and headed out just before dusk on Saturday evening. The hike was longer than I expected. The overgrown trail leading to the cemetery wasn't marked, and I had to push through brush and wet leaves for at least an hour. I didn't have a GPS, just a printed map and a general sense of direction. By the time I finally saw the rusted gate through the trees, the sun was already a pale orange smear on the horizon. The graveyard was smaller than I thought, maybe 24 headstones in total. Most of them were cracked or tilted, the writing worn down by decades of rain and wind. I remember one marker just had the initials JT with no dates at all. There was a low stone wall around the perimeter, mostly collapsed in spots. Trees had grown up along the edge, closing in over the years, like the forest was slowly swallowing the whole thing. I found a clear spot near the middle, close to a wide, flat headstone that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. The name was unreadable. I cleared a bit of ground and set up the tent. The air was getting colder, and I could already see my breath. The only sounds were the occasional rustle of wind in the trees and the high-pitched creak of branches shifting above. I didn't bring a campfire setup, since I didn't want to risk drawing attention, especially if it was private land. I had a granola bar for dinner, drank half the water, and settled in. I left the tent flap unzipped for a while, just lying there with my hoodie pulled tight and staring up at the dark shapes of tree limbs overhead. I remember thinking it was peaceful, quiet in a way you don't really get anywhere else. That feeling didn't last. Somewhere around 10 or 11, I started to feel watched. I know how that sounds, but it wasn't just nerves. It was like something had shifted. The stillness became too still. I couldn't hear a single insect, no wind, nothing. Just the sound of my own breathing. I sat up in the tent and looked around, shining my flashlight out through the mesh. The beam hit headstones, crooked trees, brush. Nothing moved. Then I noticed something off. About 15 feet away, just at the edge of the tent's light, there was a broken grave marker that looked different than before. Not the stone itself, but what was beside it. It looked like the ground there had been disturbed, like someone had dug there recently. The dirt was darker, looser. At first I thought maybe it was an animal like a coyote or a raccoon, but the hole was too wide, too clean. I told myself it didn't matter. Old graves settle, dirt shifts. Maybe the frost had lifted some of the soil. I zipped the tent closed, lay back down and tried to ignore it, but the feeling didn't go away. I lay there for what felt like an hour, unable to sleep. Then I heard something. Not footsteps, not animals. It was a sharp, rhythmic sound, like metal on stone. Not fast, not loud, just steady.
Top, top, top.
I froze. It was coming from the left side of the graveyard. The sound of something striking rock. Not hard enough to chip it, but enough to echo slightly in the cold night air. I sat up slowly, unzipped the flap just an inch and peered out with the flashlight. The light barely reached that side of the graveyard, but I could make out a tall, leaning headstone there. The noise stopped. I kept the beam trained there for a minute, then turned it off. Darkness swallowed everything again. I listened. Nothing. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was standing right behind that stone, waiting. I closed the flap and didn't sleep. I must have drifted in and out, but around 3 or 4 a.m., I heard another sound. This time it was closer, right outside the tent. It was the sound of breathing, not heavy breathing, slow, calm, like someone was standing still and just breathing normally. I held my breath and listened, heart hammering. I didn't move. I didn't turn on the light. I just stayed still, trying not to even blink. After what felt like minutes, the breathing stopped. Then I heard soft crunches in the leaves, moving away. Eventually, the sounds faded. I waited until the first light crept into the sky before unzipping the tent. Everything looked the same, but as I stepped out and turned to the left side of the graveyard, the side where I'd heard the tapping, I saw footprints. Not boot prints, bare feet. The tracks were shallow but unmistakable. A set of barefoot prints circling around the tent, then moving toward the edge of the cemetery, disappearing into the underbrush. I followed them a few feet before stopping. Something told me not to keep going. My skin was crawling. I packed everything as fast as I could. I didn't eat, didn't even stop to tie my boots properly. Just stuffed the tent into the bag and started down the trail. My legs were stiff from the cold, but adrenaline pushed me. I didn't stop once during the hike back. I didn't look behind me. When I got home, I locked the door to my room and sat on the floor for a long time. The next week, I asked the guy from work about that graveyard again. He just laughed and said his cousin made the whole camping thing up. "Nobody goes there," he said. "Not since they found that homeless guy living out there years ago. Dug his own grave," they said. "Slept in it for months. Then he just vanished." I never asked again, and I never went back. That winter, I moved south closer to my sister. I never told anyone the full story. Not because I thought they'd think I was lying, but because I still don't understand it myself.
No ghosts, no demons.
Just someone out there, living, breathing, watching, and I was stupid enough to spend a night in their backyard. I was 23 when I decided to go on a solo camping trip in the Ouachita National Forest in Arkansas. This was back in the fall of 2017, early October. I was working as a freelance photographer at the time and had taken a few days off to reset and clear my head. The whole point of the trip was to disconnect. No phone, no laptop, no contact with the outside world. Just me, my backpack, my camera, and the woods. I parked my car off a Forest Service road and hiked in about 6 miles, far enough from the road to feel alone but not completely off the map. The trail I followed wasn't marked very well, but I had a topographic map and compass. I'd done this sort of thing before. I wasn't an expert survivalist, but I knew how to take care of myself. That first day was uneventful. I found a flat clearing near a slow-moving creek, set up my tent, hung my food, and gathered some firewood. The air smelled like damp leaves and pine, and it was quiet, almost too quiet. I didn't think much of it at the time. I chalked it up to the stillness of the forest. Sometimes it just feels that way. After dinner, just a freeze-dried pouch of chili. I sat by the fire until the sun dipped behind the ridge. The woods got dark fast, and once the fire died down, I climbed into my sleeping bag and drifted off to the sounds of insects and running water. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. I don't know why. There wasn't a sound that snapped me out of sleep, at least none that I could remember. I was just suddenly aware, like something had changed. I laid there in my bag, completely still, listening. The insects had stopped. No chirping, no buzzing, no distant owl. Just silence. There's something about silence in the woods that isn't peaceful. It's heavy, like the trees are holding their breath. That's the best way I can describe it. I strained to hear something, anything, but the only sound I caught was my own heartbeat, loud in my ears. Then I heard it, a slow, dry crack, like a stick snapping under pressure. It wasn't close, maybe 50 or 60 feet away, off in the trees to the north. At first, I thought it might be a deer, then another snap closer. Too deliberate for an animal, too heavy. I laid there, not moving a muscle. My heart was pounding hard now. Another step, slower this time, like someone trying not to be heard but failing. I reached for my flashlight and gripped it tight but didn't turn it on. Part of me wanted to yell or make noise to scare off whatever it was, but I didn't know if that was a good idea. I didn't even know what I was dealing with. After maybe 10 minutes, the steps stopped. Just silence again. I waited, trying to keep my breathing low. I don't know how long I stayed awake like that. Could have been an hour, could have been 3. But eventually, exhaustion won, and I must have dozed off with the flashlight still in my hand. The next morning, everything looked normal. Nothing out of place. The forest was noisy again. Birds, squirrels, bugs, like whatever happened the night before never happened. I checked around my tent but didn't see any tracks. The ground was hard-packed with leaves, and nothing seemed disturbed. I tried to shrug it off and told myself it was just a deer, a big one, maybe an armadillo. I tried to laugh about it, but I didn't really believe that. I decided to stay one more night. I don't know why. Pride maybe, or stupidity. I just didn't want to leave early over something I couldn't explain. I went about my day as normal, took pictures, made coffee, gathered more wood, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that I was being watched. I kept catching movement in the corners of my eyes, and once I swore I saw a figure on the ridge above camp. I hiked up there and looked around, but found nothing. That night, I didn't build a fire. I didn't want to draw attention. I ate in silence, brushed my teeth with my headlamp off, and zipped myself in tight. I kept my knife next to me, blade open, and my flashlight under my pillow. Around 2 or 3 a.m., I woke up again, not to silence this time, to breathing. Heavy, slow, raspy breathing. Not animal breathing, not snorting or sniffing. Human, right outside the tent, no more than 3 feet away from my head. I froze. My skin went cold. I couldn't tell if I was awake or dreaming, but the breathing continued. Out, out. It moved from one side of the tent to the other. Slow steps, crunching leaves, and then the softest sound, a zipper being touched. I heard fingers brushing the nylon, not pulling it, not unzipping it, just feeling it, testing it. I wanted to scream. I wanted to lunge with the knife, turn on the light, do something, but I was frozen with fear. Every instinct told me not to move. Then the breathing stopped. I waited. 10 seconds, 30, full minute. No more footsteps, no sounds at all. I laid there until first light. When I finally stepped out, there were footprints, not animal prints. Shoes, barely visible in the leaves, but there. Human, medium-sized like a man's boot. They circled my tent twice. Then they led off into the trees. I packed up fast. No breakfast, no cleanup. I stuffed everything into my pack and was on the trail within 10 minutes. I didn't look back. On the hike out, I didn't stop once. I didn't eat. I didn't drink. I just walked, my head on a swivel, ears sharp for any sound behind me. I kept expecting to hear footsteps catching up, or see someone just off the trail staring. When I finally saw the edge of the service road and my car, I almost cried. I threw my gear in the trunk and peeled out without even checking my GPS. I just wanted distance between me and those woods. I didn't report it. I didn't call the rangers. I couldn't even explain what I'd say. Somebody breathed outside my tent? Felt so stupid when I tried to put it into words. But it happened. I know what I heard. Back home, it took me a week to sleep through the night. I kept thinking about those prints, how close they got, what they wanted. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a cryptid. It was a person, a real person, alone with me in the woods, in the middle of the night, touching the fabric of my tent. And they didn't say a word. I still go camping now and then, but never alone. Not anymore. It was late October 2011. I was 32 years old and had taken a week off work to go on a solo hunting trip in the high backcountry near Mill Creek, up in the Idaho panhandle. I'd hunted the area a couple of times before with my uncle years ago, but this was the first time I'd be up there alone. The plan was to track elk for a few days and maybe bring down a buck if I saw a good one. I liked the cold air, the silence, and the sense of being small in a place that didn't care whether I came or went. I parked my truck at the trailhead, a rough patch of dirt barely wide enough for 2 vehicles to squeeze past, and hiked in 5 miles to a spot my uncle and I used to call the Ridge. It overlooked a narrow valley where elk sometimes moved through at dawn and dusk. The ridge wasn't anything special to look at, just a flattened knoll with a decent view, but it was far from everything and quiet enough that you could hear a pine cone drop from a tree 2 hills away. I brought my old .308 Winchester, 2 knives, my pack with 3 days worth of dehydrated meals, and my small canvas tent. Nights were dropping to the mid-20s, but I had my thermals, a thick sleeping bag, and a decent fire ring I had built years ago. I set up camp just before sundown on the first day. The wind came down through the trees in slow, steady gusts, and the woods felt calm, almost too calm. That first night passed like most. I heard coyotes far off and the snap of branches from deer moving through. Around 3 a.m., something large moved near my tent. I sat up, heart pounding, rifle in hand, and listened. Heavy steps crunched through the forest floor. Whatever it was, maybe a moose or a bear, circled the area for several minutes before moving off downhill. It never came too close, but I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, I woke early and glassed the valley. Nothing. No tracks, no signs. Even the usual squirrels and jays were quiet. I hiked out about a mile west, toward a meadow I remembered, to look for fresh sign. Again, nothing. No scat, no tracks, no broken twigs. It was like the woods were holding their breath. The only thing I found was an old elk skeleton. Bleached bones in a tight pile like it had dropped dead and no one ever disturbed it. On the second night, the wind shifted. It came up from the valley, bringing with it the scent of wet moss and decay. Around midnight, I heard something again. It wasn't a bear. Bears grunt. This was silent except for its steps. Deliberate. Slow. I laid in my bag, holding my rifle across my chest. The thing stopped near my tent, close enough that I could hear its breathing low, controlled, steady. Then it just walked away. That next morning, I found prints. They weren't boot tracks. They were wide, with deep heel impressions and splayed toes. Barefoot, but not human. The stride was too long, too heavy. Whatever it was walked around my camp in a slow circle. I stared at those prints for a long time, my breath visible in the cold morning air. Something about them made my skin crawl. Felt wrong to be up there, but I stayed. I told myself it was probably a moose that stepped just right to smear the tracks, or a bear with an injury. I cleaned up camp, packed everything into my tent, and went scouting again. I hiked north this time, deeper into the trees, and found an old game trail that led to a narrow clearing. Something had moved through there recently. Broken branches, fresh scrapes on a pine trunk, but I didn't like the feel of the place. It was too quiet. No wind.
No birds.
Even the air tasted stale. I turned around and started heading back. That's when I heard it, twigs snapping behind me, slow, in rhythm with my steps. I stopped. It stopped. I walked faster. It walked faster. I didn't look back. I just moved, eyes forward, rifle ready. My heart pounding so loud I could barely hear anything else. I didn't run. I knew better than to run in those woods unless you absolutely had to. But I came damn close. When I reached my tent, the prints were back. Fresh ones, deeper, closer to the entrance this time. I checked inside. Nothing. My gear was untouched, but I could feel that it had been there, watching. I didn't sleep that night. I sat up with my rifle in my lap, the fire low, eyes on the darkness beyond the ring of flame. I saw nothing, heard nothing, but I didn't feel alone. By the fourth morning, my nerves were shot. I decided to pack out. No elk was worth this. I stuffed everything into my pack and started hiking back down toward the trailhead. I made it about halfway before I noticed the smell. Rotting meat, thick like old blood in the sun. I stopped and looked around. To my left, downhill, about 30 yards off the trail, something hung from a tree. It was a mule deer, gutted and stripped of skin. But it wasn't eaten. This meat was still there, untouched, and it was hung carefully with vines. Not rope, vines. Its head was twisted at an unnatural angle, and its eyes were missing. The worst part? The thing was fresh, maybe a few hours old, and I hadn't heard a single thing all night. I kept moving, faster now, rifle up, my breath short and shallow. I felt watched. I kept expecting something to rush me from the trees. My legs burned, my knees ached, but I didn't stop. Not once. I reached the truck just after noon. I unlocked it, threw my gear in the bed without tying it down, and drove out fast. Didn't even stop to check the map. I didn't care. I just wanted out. That road had never felt so long. I didn't tell anyone at first. I figured they'd think I was just rattled by a bear or spooked myself being alone. But weeks later, I talked to an old game warden at a hardware store in town. I asked him casually if there were any predators up near Mill Creek acting strange. He just gave me this look, quiet and tired, and said, "Some places you don't go alone, even if you think you know M." I nodded and never went back. That ridge, that valley, whatever was out there, it wasn't just wildlife. It watched, it followed, and it didn't want me there. Even now, years later, I still check my doors twice before bed. Sometimes, when the wind blows just right, I swear I hear footsteps outside my window. Slow, steady, deliberate. I haven't hunted since.